This is Somerton Beach, just south of Glenelg. You're looking south, so Glenelg's just that way. Of course, in 1948, the beach was a very different place. Right here, there was a neat concrete retaining wall, and behind it, a promenade. At about 7:15 on the last day of November 1948, a local businessman and his wife came down here to Somerton Beach for a stroll. It was the last day of spring and had been very warm.
They passed a man lying in the sand. They thought perhaps he was just sleeping, some drunk person from the previous night, and they didn't think anything of it. But then when they came back half an hour later and passed the same spot, the man hadn't moved. There were no signs of disturbance in the sand. There wasn't a scratch on his body, no apparent cause of death, and that is the mystery. To this day, we don't know how this man died. We don't know what his identity is, who he was, or what he was doing in Adelaide. So the police tried many things. They took the man's fingerprints. They sent the fingerprints all over Australia and to other English-speaking countries such as America and England, and his dental records, and nothing came up. No proposed identity for this man, so they were really stuck. But it became more apparent as the case wound on and on and on. It became the case was more and more unusual. There was something very unusual about it, and perhaps it wasn't such an ordinary suicide after all. And what do we know about suicide, people that have committed suicide from interstate? Hey, usually from past experience, they come here and they leave something checked in the cloakroom of the station. That's usually what happens. So, hey, let's go and check that. So, January the following year, they did just that. They went through the cloakroom records, and lo and behold, they found a suitcase that was checked in the day before he died. The clincher that convinced the police the suitcase really was his was that there was some thread in the suitcase that exactly matched the thread that was used to sew some of his buttons on his jacket. Then, stuck for further leads, the coroner decided to call upon Professor Bert Cleland, who was a professor of pathology at the University of Adelaide in the 1940s, and he found one little detail the police had missed. In the little watch pocket or fob pocket of the man's trousers that he was wearing, he found a little scrap, a tiny scrap of paper tightly rolled up, jammed in the bottom of the fob pocket. He unrolled the little piece of paper, and it looked like a little piece of paper that had been torn out of a book because it was printed. And the printed words on this paper said Tamam Shud. So that's why we call this, some people call this case the Tamam Shud case. And so no one knew what those words meant at the time, so it was advertised in the local paper in an article. And a man called Frank Kennedy came forward and he says, yes, I know what that is. That is the last words out of a book of poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And after the inquest, there was so much media publicity about the case that a man happened to read about this Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and noting that there was a missing a page with a bit torn out, and he found such a book in his car 6 months earlier, and it had just been lying in the glove box of his car since then. So the police examined the book, and they took it to a paper specialist who was in Lee Street in Adelaide, in the city. Carefully checked the paper under a microscope, looked at the texture, and came to the conclusion that yes, indeed, this bit of paper was torn out of this book.
One fact that's led some people to deduce that this wasn't just a simple case of suicide was the finding of some hand lettering inside the back cover of the Rubaiyat. That's the book that was presumably thrown into the back seat of the parked car by the dead man. 2 telephone numbers were written there, plus some lines of hand lettering, which to some people suggested some kind of a code.
The phone numbers were interesting. There isn't much recorded detail about those numbers. We know that possibly one of the numbers was the number of a local bank. However, the other phone number was very interesting. It was a phone number of a local lady who lived just 5 minutes away from where the Somerton man was found dead. And and she has been dubbed the name Justin. It's not her real name, it's a name that she's been dubbed with. And so the police looked her up. They went to her house, knocked on the door, and they asked her if she had seen this copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. While she admitted that she has seen copies of Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam's, not that particular one, and she claimed no knowledge of the Somerton man or who he was. However, the police noted that she did act in a very evasive type of way, and they took her to the Adelaide Museum next door to the University of Adelaide, where in one of the offices was the bust of the Somerton man, the plaster bust. And they took her to see the bust, to ask her if she recognised that person. She behaved in a very odd manner that day. She refused to look at the bust. She just stared at the floor for the whole police interview. And for every question they asked her, she either mumbled no or don't know. And then when the interview was over, she just turned around and didn't let her eyes fall upon the bust.
You'd made the cast, your job was sort of over. What happened to it then?
It was taken around to the coroner's court and viewed there by the various people, part of the coroner's inquiry. And afterwards it was brought back here to the museum, and we have had quite a number of people visit the museum to look at the thing to see if they could recognise the original body from the bust cast.
Any of them stand out in your memory?
I would say just ordinary people, ordinary couples, ordinary man on the street, if such a person exists.
But what did they say to you?
They didn't say anything to me. It was directed to the cast, between themselves or to the police. I was only showing them the object.
Did you get the feeling that any of them really did know him?
I don't know.
Well, that seems to suggest that you're a very cagey man, Mr. Wilson. It seems to suggest to me that maybe somebody did know him.
I wouldn't know.
Did any of them think they knew him?
I don't know. By the way, you're on tender ground.
Well, explain why.
Boys.
Well, don't worry about that.
No, I'm not going on that part.
Why not? I mean, what you suggest to me is that there's somebody who obviously did know him.
No, I'm suggesting that the people that came eliminated features and then decided they didn't know him.
But not everyone.
It's possible. I don't know.
You must have been there on some occasion where somebody really believed they knew him.
It's quite possible they weren't sure in their own mind.
So in a sense, some of your customers were more satisfied than others.
Could be.
You're not going to tell me?
Nope.